Welcome to Face the Culture. I'm Pastor David Whitney. I serve as the Senior Instructor at Institute on the Constitution. And Face the Culture looks at what's happening in our world and relates it to not only the history, but the law of our land, our United States Constitution, Declaration of Independence, where we're celebrating the 250th anniversary of the signing of that wonderful document, as well as our Bill of Rights. All of these things fit together. And as we celebrate the 250th anniversary, we have in the studio here Jim Christ of the Paoli Battlefield Preservation Fund, and they are raising funds to further develop the battlefield site there so that people can learn the history. Now, the battle took place later than 1776, a year later.
Yes.
And that took place after the probably more famous Battle of Brandywine, I guess you would say, one of the largest battles on the landmass of the continental U.S. Before that point in time. And so that was 9/11. And how many days later was the battle there at Paoli?
The Battle of Paoli was 9 days later. It was the night of September 20th into the morning of September 21st. It was a daring nighttime attack. How many nighttime attacks do you hear? This was also a sword and bayonet attack by the British. That's all they used until we get further down. There's a Maryland militia unit with about 2,100 coming down King Road, and they actually get shot at by the British after they cleared Wayne's forces from the field. So
one of the things I think most people don't understand, thinking about the battles that took place in the War for Independence, is an attack by musket is one thing. We've got hot lead flying at you, but an attack, it's a whole different thing. The attack that took place there, where they didn't do any shooting, where it was solely using their swords, and that is that's a pretty fearsome thing for a soldier to face.
It was a psychological weapon that the British used, definitely. Because this is something that's supposed to terrify and make his troops run. He also wanted to try to capture him. There was attempts made to try to encircle Wayne's troops, but it failed. And the British, actually had sound logic in that anybody who fired the gun, that's the guy you go after.
Okay.
Because shooting in the dark, you could go after many different targets.
Right.
This is
where that target is.
You know where that target is, right? You saw a flash, go after him. So anyone who shot at the British or anyone who tried to run away, they got bayoneted. Anybody who stayed in line with their comrades maybe eventually got through, but the British are sort of not compacting at them now. They're kind of trying to group them and get them into a circle, and it never worked.
Yeah, they were able to slide out. One side
Wayne,
of it.
Wayne luckily had the 4th PA, which was the regiment he raised to fire in and keep the British back while he tried to get the rest of his brigades out. So it was a bloody battle. It's the 9th bloodiest battle of the Revolutionary War. There were atrocities definitely committed there. The word massacre comes up and attached to this. We don't have any evidence, and the Army definition of massacre is the commander has to tell you, we're going to massacre, don't show surrender. We don't have any of that evidence as far as Paoli relates, but there were definite atrocities. Soldiers being burned alive, soldiers being stabbed. This one guy's 46 times. And he said it's just for the pure sport of the British. They got him up in a corner.
Was there something leading up to that may have provoked the British to be that vicious in the Battle of Paoli?
Part of it is that. I think in 76, those battles, they thought one big battle, and they'll come to their senses, was what Howe wanted. Howe was more of an amicable guy. He wanted a way out of the war. He even did a peace conference in New York after they leave Boston and they take over New York. Then he holds a peace conference with Benjamin Franklin, John Adams, and he invites Washington by just saying, hey, George, would you show up here? Instead of General Washington, may we have never addressed them as that. And because of that, Washington didn't show up, and it sort of fell apart because they thought, you've seen what we were able to do, you'll come back to us. And that was always the British fatal flaw. Even going down south, they thought, all these loyalists will flock to our sides. And to a degree, some of it happened, but not in the numbers that they were hoping.
So in the battle itself, there were some troops from Maryland on their way, right?
Yes.
They didn't get there in the timely fashion. Sorry about that. I'm from Maryland, so sorry.
Okay.
I don't in a timely fashion.
Don't want to disparage Maryland. They're a great state. These were raw green troops.
Okay.
Never seen battle before. And General Smallwood and Colonel Gist are leading them to here. Now, the one problem that the Maryland militia had, they were out marching their supplies.
Yeah.
They would march so far, then they had to stop and wait for their supplies to catch up.
Yeah.
And it was they were supposed to be here for Brandywine. It didn't happen. It's supposed to be here for Clouds. It doesn't happen. Now they're here for Paoli, and they come a little bit late to the party by a few hours. Now, if they would have been here when that happened in the field, it would have been even worse, I think. But the Maryland militia came down the road. They were first. There was a friendly fire incident with Wayne's troops exiting, and they were going the other way on the same road.
Not recognizing, okay, that we're part of the same force.
Because they didn't know, right? These guys are running down the street yelling and screaming. They don't know what's going on, so they fire on them thinking they might be British, and Smallwood has to put that down, and then he turns, they tell him what's going on, and they tell him, go back to the tavern that you were last at. So he turns the soldiers around on the road. They start marching the other way. The British line up in an ambush, rise up, and just devastate them. And as Smallwood said, that the men flung down their guns and have not been seen since. They ran off from the hills, and they have the wagoneers cut the horses from the artillery and from the wagons, and they ran off with them. They didn't want any part of staying around for the British. And, he marches down the road with 2,100. He marches back to the tavern with less than 900.
Wow.
So that's a lot.
A lot of people fled.
And you had the Chester County Sheriffs looking for him the whole autumn. So it was definitely quite
in the condition of this part of Pennsylvania at the time, there's probably a lot of places to hide or a lot of woods to escape to. There's you could get away from civilization pretty easily at that point in time.
No internet.
And no cameras on every corner surveilling your location.
Exactly.
Speaking of which, you mentioned that there was an interesting interplay in what happened in terms of military intelligence going on both sides, and that our side, the American side, lacked some of the military intelligence, that the British were able to basically have that intelligence that gave them an upper edge in that battle.
Yeah, I mean, Britain, think about it. They're the richest country in the world. They can afford to pay their spies top dollar. They know who the people are since they've been in Philadelphia. They know this kind of stuff. Washington is relying on people who are basically, I'm with the cause. I want to do this for the cause. Not necessarily for super riches. I mean, they do pay some spies. Some spies are paid. But Brandywine is a perfect example of it, where Washington's intelligence is telling him, it's just the fords along the Chadds Ford area.
Okay.
That's it. Don't go up into the upper fords, because you got to cross two branches of the Brandywine. Who would do that? It's hard enough to cross one, let alone two. And that's what he did. He had his troops lined up. Howe had Joseph Galloway and his band from Philadelphia, who traded with these people. They know them. They know how to get there. They traveled it to this area. And they tell him, hey, you can cross these two fords and you'll be on the other side of the river before Washington knows it. Other intelligence that lets him down is Washington's getting conflicting reports that day. Hey, I saw this large column on the moving towards the upper fords. When he sends people out there, people he trusts, like Major from Virginia Cavalry, they can't find anything.
Wow.
I rode up and back, I didn't see anything. And how can you miss like 15,000 men marching, and the dust clouds
blind.
that leads? Yeah, I mean, it's erroneous.
So do you think some of those people he was relying on were purposely giving false information?
It could be. You just figure in your mind, how could they do it unless they were looking in the wrong locations? Yeah. But it's pretty clear. Washington had to conflict it. He kept getting, they're here, they're not here, they're here, they're not here, they're here, they're not here, and he actually was going to send Anthony Wayne and his men over, because he thought, okay, if he's way up there, I have time to knock out the Hessians in front of me, and then I'll have time to do it. And right as Wayne is ready to cross over the Chadds Ford, or the Brandywine Creek at Chadds Ford, all of a sudden he gets the message, they're already on the other side, and it's, okay, I gotta do what I can. And that was called off, luckily. For I think Anthony Wayne, but
so some of those things, the fog of war sometimes leaves people confused in the midst of, and so they're making decisions based on information that's really not correct, and that was for Washington one of the tragedies, I guess, that really was part of this series of battles here in central Pennsylvania.
Yeah, and he had to learn on the fly. He had to really learn purposely how to build a spy network. He didn't really have too much knowledge of that. The Britons, they've been doing it all their lives.
Right.
Here's someone who, I mean, think about it, what Washington is up against. Building an army, keeping it together, keeping that civilian reign on the army as far as what it can and can't do. Keeping the Congress apprised of everything, asking for appropriations, getting the right people appointed. I mean, he had a ton of stuff on his plate.
Task,
and thank God we had somebody like him who, twice turned down power. He could have marched on Philadelphia as a general and took over. He could have, as president, kept going. I'm going to make it, president for life. He could have been that if he wanted to.
And he had support of some of his officers in the military to do that, to sort of become a king.
Exactly.
Or, some sort of monarchy. And he turned that down. I know that in Annapolis, they had preserved and they've redone it now, so I'm not sure it's up and running yet. But the room of the Senate, Senate where they met, where Washington handed his resignation. I think it was the 23rd of December, just before Christmas that year, which King George III commented, he heard that this was going to happen, and he commented that if he does that, he'll be the greatest man.
Yes.
Because he's surrendering power where he had the opportunity to take all power to himself and basically make himself a king. And there were, like I say, sentiments among some of his officers that wanted him to do that. Particularly one I think of is Alexander Hamilton, who was sort of, because George Washington didn't have any biological children, Hamilton was kind of his semi-adopted son. So I think Hamilton had hoped, well, if it's a hereditary monarchy, I'll be next in line. So that kind of... But, when we think of Washington's greatness, you're right. One of the things about his character is he didn't hold on to power when he had the opportunity to do that. He valued what was being established is a republic where there's not a king and there's no hereditary monarchy and there's not a power base that's outside of the realm of we the people, who are going to choose those who represent us in Congress, choose those who represent us in the White House. So that's part of the greatness. And so for Washington, you're right, he was learning on the fly in this experience. I know one of the challenges he had was with Congress, because Congress did not have the power of taxation.
Correct.
They could ask the states, could you supply us some gunpowder? Could you give us some food? Could you horses? It was all by request or requisitions, but none of it was forcing any of the states to supply anything at all.
Right, and look at how he weathered the Conway cabal. Here's General Gates who won this huge victory at Saratoga, and him and Conway are doing everything they can in Congress to take over control from Washington, and even Lafayette's telling him what's going on in York, and basically he, instead of reacting violently, saying, okay, I give up my command, if you're going to do this to me, he weathered the storm, just kind of ignored it, just let it blow over. Lafayette did his part in York too. There's actually a statue of Lafayette in York holding a champagne glass and talking about a toast that he supposedly made in front of Horatio Gates, basically praising Washington and saying we're great to have Washington in command of this army, and it kind of helped diffuse a little bit of the situation, because Gates was going to trying to pull Lafayette away from Washington, and it didn't work. So
the loyalty there was
the loyalty that these guys had to him. You say Hamilton too. Here's a guy who was a artillerist, and Washington got him on his staff. Those two had a bit of a falling out, but then they came back together for Yorktown. He charges the redoubts.
Yes, redoubt number 9, the famous redoubt.
He's a hero for it, and rightfully so. And then he's a Federalist. He comes down on how we should do things, as opposed to what we would call the Jeffersonians,
small
wing, and it won. So we're thank goodness we have the leaders that we did have at that time.
Would to God that we would have leaders today who would have the same selfless attitude and same desire not to grab power to themselves, but be willing to say the greater good for everyone concerned is that we preserve our form of government, we preserve the values that are expressed in the Declaration of Independence, our Constitution, and the Bill of Rights. And sadly, I think that is too rare a quality among those who are holding political office.
Yes.
And really, I would argue that comes back on we the people. Because we are the ones who select those who run for office.
Absolutely.
And if we don't vet them properly, then we're going to get folks who may be more concerned for their own aggrandizement than they are for the well-being of of their constituents, whether they're representing just an area of the state of Pennsylvania or representing the whole of Pennsylvania in Washington, D.C.
Absolutely.
So as you reflect back on the Battle of Paoli and what has been accomplished in terms of the preservation of the battlefield, what are the goals? I know that you're going to do some things because the 250th anniversary of that battle is coming up next year.
Correct.
And so some of the celebrations and plans that you have in
Well, we do have walking tours. If you're interested in any of our events, you can go to rememberpaoli.org to look them up and to register for them. We have a walking tour actually coming up July 25th. It's a Saturday in July. If anyone wants to come to the battlefield, learn all about it, you can sign up on our website and come out and do that. We are going to have our Heritage Day, as we call it. We try to have it as close to the 20th as we can. You have to have it on the weekend. You can't,
can't do
make it on the 20th.
Right?
The 20th this year is on a Sunday, so it's kind of hard. The Sons of the American Revolution are going to have as they do every year, right around the 20th. The 20th, this day falls on a Sunday. They're going to make it Saturday night, which will be the 19th. They want to do a remembrance ceremony. And it's about an hour long at the battlefield. You can come and there'll be chairs there for you to sit down and be comfy and listen to people talk and espouse their stuff. But it's a nice little memorial that we do. But for Heritage Day, we do a military timeline from the Rev War all the way out to World War II.
All right. Wow.
We show what they dressed, what they carried into battle. We even do a firing demo, so we show the evolution of how it happened.
It's complicated when you're shooting a musket.
Oh, yes.
You got to put the powder, and you got to close this. And
there's so many. Yeah, and
number of actions before you could actually pull the trigger.
Right.
Yeah.
And there's so many things that have been sayings about stuff, like you heard a flash in the pan. He's just a flash in the pan. Everyone kind of knows that what it means. Yeah. He's all glitz and glitter, but there's nothing there. Right. And that comes from firing a musket. When you put powder in the pan of the gun and you close the lid over it and you pull the mechanism back, when it strikes the hammer, when it strikes the flint, it sends a spark into that pan to ignite it, and that's supposed to then through a hole hit the barrel, which shoots the bullet out. And if it just the pan went poof, but the barrel didn't go off, that was called a flash in the pan. You also had lock, stock, and barrel. You've heard that term, and that's the whole gun: the lock, the stock, and the barrel. So there's a lot of things too that you've heard from this. Don't go off half cocked.
So
that's
if you don't
another
pull the lever all the way back.
Yeah, if you pull it halfway, that's half cocked, and if you try to fire it, it's not going to work. So it's like got to go full cock, and then you can. So there's terminology like that. That's kind of fun that you do it. But anyway, getting back to Heritage Day, we have historical sites, we have historical commissions and societies. We usually have something for the kids.
Oh, good.
I think this year we're trying to get a Batmobile out there just for because actually the funny part, the guys who created Batman actually picked, I think it was Sir Robert Bruce, who was a Scottish king, and Anthony Wayne.
Oh, really?
To get the name Bruce Wayne.
Okay.
So there is a tie to Batman.
That's a little bit of a...
So if you want to get your kids into the Revolutionary War and a little bit of comics, you can say that Anthony Wayne and Batman were, I guess, relatives.
Obviously, the town we're in right now is named after him.
Yes.
And there's many, Fort Wayne, Indiana. There's Waynes all over the country, and most people don't know the history of that man. He was a great patriot and a great military leader.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't know what happened after the war. After the war, he runs for Congress in Georgia, and his aides are stuffing the ballot box for him. He doesn't know this. He's up in Philadelphia about to get seated, and they say, "Hey, come here a minute, Anthony. We got to." There were 5,000. You represent about 2,000 people, and you got 5,000 votes. Something's
that
not
doesn't work.
right.
It kind of sounds like some of the elections going on today, right?
So he had to find a job because he was in debt, and he could get thrown in debtor's prison. So he went to Washington, who's in Philadelphia, and Washington has just gotten a letter a few weeks ago from St. Clair saying that the First American Legion that went to put down the Indian uprisings in the West were defeated completely by the Indians. And the Indians purposely left just a few people to come back and tell Washington the news as like a warning, don't send anybody else out. So he decides Anthony Wayne needs a job, In a way, he's expendable, but he's a good commander. He's seen what he's done in the Revolutionary War. So he tells this to Jefferson, to Adams, to Hamilton. They all say, no, he's a hothead. Don't let Wayne in there.
And he had that reputation really poorly attributed to him. It was,
poorly. I mean, the
really
whole,
not his true character. That,
right. And the whole thing with Mad Anthony Wayne, no one really called him that to his face.
Right.
And this was something that I think it was Wilkinson invented, who was the traitor who was with Aaron Burr.
Right. And that attempt
trying to turn
take the western part of the country and create a new country.
And Burr should have been convicted,
Yes.
but he had his political connections, which still go on today, of people who don't get prosecuted for
they
something
get away with
they should have. Right. So, he.
So Wayne did take the troops.
Wayne did
to deal with what was happening.
He made a deal
frontier.
with Washington. I want to train the troops, and I want to train the troops my way, and I want to pick the men in my troops. So he wouldn't have any interference of you got to get this make this man an officer. He didn't get any of that from Washington. Washington kind of let him do it. So he marched his men out. He had about 2,000 men he raised, and he got to a certain point. He said, "Okay, I'm going to go with half of you up to this mountain. We're going to be the Indians. The other half you're going to be down here as the Americans." He went up there. He yelled some kind of wild war chants. They rode down the mountain. The camp's deserted. All his men fled. Wow. So you had to rebuild the army and keep doing this and training them daily on how to do stuff. And the smart thing he did, he built forts everywhere he went. So this is a fort. Now I can go 10 miles, build another fort. Now I can. So he always had a supply chain, base. And then when he met the Indians, at I think it was Battle of Paoli Timbers.
Okay.
He won that battle and secured the Midwest for the United States because it was the British who were giving guns to the Indians to cause mayhem.
War going on.
And in direct violation
to the
treaty. So, if it wasn't for him, we might have been just along the coastline where we were. You
Stop
never know.
at the top of the Appalachian Mountains where the king had drawn the line that was part of the conflict that led to the War for Independence as well.
Exactly.
Yeah, so Wayne is probably one of those underrated historical figures that people live in Wayne, Pennsylvania, or they're familiar with Fort Wayne, but they have no idea where that name Wayne came from or why he should be honored as well.
He fought at Yorktown.
Yes.
The Battle of Green Springs. Here's a guy who, leading his Pennsylvania, they're following Lafayette, his troops down the peninsula to go after the British. The British get word of this. They attack Lafayette's troop, but they go after Wayne too. They send a contingent, and they say, what could we do to stop Anthony Wayne's men where we could come out with bayonets and charge him and decimate him? And they decided, let's put a cannon just alone in the middle of the field. And they lined one side of the forest next to that cannon with their troops. And sure enough, the men made a beeline for the cannon. They dropped their weapons. They're all posing with it. No. And the British come out with their bayonets. They charge them. The Americans are about to be routed. They're running back. Wayne sees it and gets the rest of his men and gets his line in order and say, charge back at the British. And they're like, what? Charge back at the British. So they turn around, they charge the British. The British are like, why are the Americans charging us? We better get out of here. Maybe he has more men with them. So the British turn around and run away. And, here's a guy with knowledge right there of how to stop a bayonet attack. I mean, if you want a perfect example of it, there's Anthony Wayne.
Yeah, Anthony Wayne. So encourage folks to go to which website in terms of learning about Paoli Battlefield?
RememberPaoli.org.
RememberPaoli.org.
We are in conjunction with the Paoli Memorial Association building a visitor center if people would like to contribute to that. Yeah.
And so the progress is moving forward with...
Progress is moving forward. We're about 75,000 or so short of our goal, but we're hoping to close that goal in the next couple of months and, get the shovels ready.
Very good. Well, we're excited. And, as we look at the history of what took place 250 years ago, we today need to be grateful for those who paid, and many of them paid the ultimate sacrifice.
Absolutely.
They gave their lives to establish our liberty in this constitutional republic.
Yep.
And so we need to be involved in preserving this constitutional republic, which is what we are about here at Face the Culture, and teaching people those founding principles so that we can preserve for the next generation the liberty that we enjoy. We want folks to remember that at Face the Culture, we share with folks the founding view of our founders. There is a creator God, the God of the Bible. Our rights come from him and from him alone. And the only purpose of human civil government is to preserve and protect those those God-given rights. Check us out on the web, facetheculture.org, and we invite you to join us again for our next program as we explore events in this area that you need to know about. Join us again here at Face the Culture.